The reaction could have been far worse. This is Poland, this is Russia, and they do have something in common, something that has kept tensions between the two countries simmering for a long time. Normally, countries don't share seas in a way that sparks disputes. Each one has its own coastline, its own territory, and that's that. But here the situation is very different. Recently, Poland dredged 28 million cubic feet of material from the seabed, poured hundreds of tons of concrete, spent hundreds of millions of euros, and created a new route for itself. The goal is to reduce dependence on Russia when it comes to access to the Baltic Sea. Russia, of course, reacted negatively and called it a pointless waste of money, but it didn't realize what would come next. Before long, ships showed up again, vessels dredging the seabed again, thousands of cubic feet of material are being removed, but this time it's not for building a canal. Now Russia sees Poland's actions as a military threat because the country is losing a layer of protection it counted on. And Poland? Well, Poland is happy. Still confused about what's going on out there? Don't worry, we're about to break it all down. Baltic Sea dependency. On the southern edge of the Baltic Sea stretches a narrow, almost fragile ribbon of sand, the Vistula Spit. It looks like a thin seam stitched between two different worlds. On one side is the open Baltic, with wind and rolling waves. On the other is the Vistula Lagoon, a large enclosed body of water that feels more like a calm lake than part of the sea. The water here is quieter, the depths are shallower, and the shoreline seems tailor-made for piers, warehouses, and port cranes. On the Polish shore of the lagoon stands Elblag, a port city with a long history, used to living not on the sea itself, but slightly inland. A ship leaving Elblag first crosses the lagoon and only then reaches the open Baltic. The problem is that the Vistula Lagoon has only one natural outlet to the sea, a narrow strait near the town of Baltiisk. After World War II, Baltiisk became part of Russia's Kaliningrad Oblast. So Poland had a port on the lagoon, but the lagoon's only exit to the sea was controlled by another country. On paper, there were agreements, rules of passage, and clearance procedures. In calm years, ships did make it out to the Baltic without major incidents, but the route was always precarious. The strait runs alongside military infrastructure, and traffic could be restricted at any moment because of exercises, security regimes, or decisions made without regard for Polish ports. In this arrangement, Poland had to ask for access rather than control its own route to the sea. As a result, commercial shipping often barely moved. There was simply too much uncertainty. Logistics companies value predictability, investors want guarantees. Nearby Polish ports with direct access to the open sea won by default. Elblag, despite its good location, existing infrastructure, and history, gradually slipped into the background, turning into a secondary node on the Baltic map. And after the early 2010s, the situation began to worry Poland even more. What once seemed like an inconvenience was increasingly described as a strategic vulnerability. Dependence on a strait controlled by Russia no longer looked like a temporary compromise. At any moment, the exit from the lagoon could be restricted, putting the port's prospects, investment plans, and the wider region at risk. So in 2019, Poland decided if there's no passage through the Spit on our territory, we'll build one ourselves. New route. Poland carefully surveyed the Spit and found the perfect spot for a new route, at its narrowest point, on the site of the former settlement of Nowy Swiat. The price tag was about 470 million euros, or roughly $500 million, and the project was dubbed the Vistula Spit Canal. First, the site was fully prepared. The ground was leveled, trees were cleared, and everything was set up to make construction as straightforward as possible. To carve out the canal, about 28 million cubic feet of soil were removed from the Spit. Then came shoreline reinforcement and the preparation of areas for the lock, bridges, and technical facilities. A navigational lock was built about 886 feet long, 82 feet wide, and roughly 21 feet deep. It equalizes water levels and allows vessels to pass through the sandy Spit safely. Two swing bridges, each around 197 feet long, were placed across the canal so the Spit wouldn't become a dead end for road traffic. In the end, the canal came out to roughly 1 mile long with a navigational depth of about 16 feet. On paper, it looked impressive. The passage was open to vessels up to 333 feet long, 65 feet wide, with a draft of up to 15 feet. In 2022, the Vistula Spit Canal officially opened. The long-awaited new route was ready, and Poland's reliance on Russia was reduced. That's also when Russia's reaction became part of the story. Russian officials and media stressed that Poland had not coordinated the project with Russia and warned that it could harm the ecology of the Vistula Lagoon. Poland pushed back, calling those claims fabricated and pointing to one key addition, an artificial island of 447 acres created from the dredged material removed during canal construction. In the future, the new land is meant to become a habitat for many birds and other animals displaced by the project. Russia also dismissed the canal as economically inefficient. Why? Because even though the canal allows ships with a draft of up to 15 feet, those ships still can't actually reach the port of Elblag. The lagoon's average depth is only 6 to 10 feet, so a vessel that makes it through the canal with a 15-foot draft could run aground near the exit. After the opening, only yachts and other small craft were using the canal. Poland already had an answer in the works: large-scale dredging of the lagoon bottom, lifting millions of cubic feet of sediment once again. In 2024, a vessel named Ursa entered the Vistula Lagoon, a working machine built for one purpose: to keep the Vistula Spit Canal project from turning into a beautiful but useless facility. The canal is there, the lock is there, the breakwaters are in place, but the most stubborn section is the fairway through the Vistula Lagoon between the canal and the port of Elblag. It's about 5 miles long, and it's remained the bottleneck for commercial shipping. The task is simple: increase depth to about 16 feet, break the fairway width to 196 feet, and widen turning areas to 394 feet. Only then can ships up to 330 feet long with a 15-foot draft cross the lagoon without the risk of running aground. A contract for the works has already been signed with a budget of around 30 million euros. The plan is to finish the main lagoon work in 2026. But that still wasn't enough. The final obstacle is the river approach to the port of Elblag, about 2,950 feet long, and it's shallow as well. Dredging on that stretch began in 2025, with completion planned for mid-2026. According to Polish officials, 2026 is when all the pieces are supposed to finally come together: the canal, the lagoon fairway, and the port approaches. If the plan works, vessels will be able to complete the entire route without caveats or temporary workarounds. And 2026 may become a turning point not only for Poland, but for Russia as well. A small corner of the Baltic region will no longer be the same. The point of no return. So Poland will get its own access route to the Baltic Sea. Yes, the port has never been large or particularly important, but in today's reality, Russia wants more leverage over rival countries, and once a new route exists, it won't be possible to simply block Poland's way into the Baltic. On top of that, everyone is well aware of the current Russia-NATO rivalry. As soon as Poland began talking about the canal, concerns were voiced in Russia. The canal will be used by NATO or other countries for military purposes, Russian media claimed. Moscow, in particular, said the Vistula Spit Canal would act as a new doorway, allowing alliance warships to enter the Vistula Lagoon without passing near Russia's military bases in Baltic. And this poses a major threat to Kaliningrad, Russia's most important strategic foothold in Europe. Many people in Poland also asked the obvious question: was it worth the money? After all, 470 million euros is not a small amount. The answer from senior officials was clear: absolutely. First and foremost, Poland no longer needs to rely on passage through a Russian-controlled strait. Now the port of Elblag can send and receive vessels without fear or uncertainty. That's the most straightforward goal, especially given today's tensions. Poland also says that once the entire route is fully developed by 2045, it could generate nearly $900 million. The main reason is that Elblag would gain something it never had before: the ability to handle mid-sized cargo ships. And of course, port development and investment also mean jobs. The figure being mentioned is 3,300 new positions. All in all, the new Polish canal is a telling example of how one country is willing to spend serious money to reduce its dependence on another. Although it's hard to call 470 million euros a huge investment, there's another country that spent over $60 billion to achieve the same goal. Money Strait. The Strait of Malacca is one of the world's key choke points for maritime trade. It's a narrow maritime bottleneck between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, carrying cargo from the Persian Gulf, Africa, and Europe to East and Southeast Asia and back again. Around 94,000 ships pass through every year, and any slowdown is felt instantly across the entire planet. It's one of the busiest waterways in the world. At the same time, the strait doesn't belong to any one country. It lies between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and they patrol their respective stretches, manage navigation, and handle security. Essentially, 3 states keep a hand on the pulse of global logistics. And that, more than anything, is what worries one major power, China. By various estimates, roughly 80% of the oil imported by the PRC passes through the Strait of Malacca. Keep in mind that for China, oil isn't just another commodity, it's life. The country's developing rapidly, and for now it still depends on black gold. Without it, China can't generate enough energy at scale. Renewables simply haven't reached that level yet. As a result, energy supplies from the Middle East and Africa that power Chinese factories, transport, and cities are forced through a narrow sea corridor only a few dozen miles long. On top of oil, there's the steady stream of container ships, goods flowing into China and out of China. For the world's second-largest economy, that's an uncomfortably vulnerable position. For Beijing, a route controlled by other countries is a full-blown geopolitical problem. That's exactly why China began looking for a workaround. This is how the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, emerged, one of the flagship components of the Belt and Road Initiative with a price tag of over $60 billion. The corridor is a roughly 1,860-mile infrastructure network linking Xinjiang to Pakistan's coastline. The logic is simple. Oil and cargo arrive in the Arabian Sea, are unloaded in Pakistan, and then move overland into China. But what did all that money actually go toward? First of all, China needed a port on Pakistan's Arabian Sea coast, one capable of meeting the country's enormous needs. There was one candidate, the port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea, built by Pakistan in the mid-2000s as a deep water facility. But for China, there was a problem. It turned out to be not enough. Gwadar could handle basic transshipment, mostly raw materials and small container volumes, but it wasn't equipped to serve large international tankers or provide the speed and scale needed for high-throughput logistics into the region's interior. So Beijing moved to upgrade it. The core work includes extending berths for large vessels, building modern container terminals, warehouses, and a free trade zone. On top of that, Gwadar's being integrated into Pakistan's domestic transport network through highways and rail lines, while digital logistics and automation are being developed to streamline operations. The goal is to turn the port from a regional node into a strategic maritime hub, one that can speed up transit for China and reduce dependence on the Strait of Malacca. It's also worth noting that Pakistan simply didn't have a road network suitable for a corridor on this scale. That's why, under the initiative, 10 to 12 major transport projects are either underway or already completed, highways that China's building and upgrading together with Pakistan. You think China stopped there? Not at all, because it also began expanding Pakistan's energy sector. China has already built or is building hydro and thermal power plants with a combined capacity of around 7 gigawatts, along with a transmission line linking Pakistan's southern and northern power hubs. For now, tens of billions in investments still haven't produced the full payoff. Work at Gwadar isn't finished, and some road and energy projects are still underway. But in Beijing, 2030 is often cited as the point when oil and cargo will truly start bypassing the Strait of Malacca. If that happens, one of the world's narrowest maritime choke points will no longer be China's only option. Another important point, China also gains access to Europe without relying on the Strait of Malacca. Although the route then runs into the Suez Canal, which has been facing plenty of problems lately. But China has yet another alternative, one that reaches Europe and doesn't depend on the Suez. No one had to build it, and there's no need to invest tens of billions. It already exists, just with a few caveats. Icy Way. Sometimes the world's most important routes don't look like wide highways. They look like thin threads. They stretch across deserts, straits, and canals, and as long as everything runs smoothly, hardly anyone notices them. But the moment one of those threads snaps, the whole global system starts to jolt, grind, and crack. One such choke point is the Suez Canal. Around 12 to 15% of global trade and up to 30% of container shipping passes through it. It's not just water between two shores, it's a giant valve on the world economy. Any accident, military incident, or political tension immediately affects prices and delivery times. There's an alternative route around Africa, but it's longer, slower, and far more expensive, which is why logistics planners keep coming back to the same question. Is there an alternative? Yes, there is. And it's a route that used to sound exotic, the Northern Sea Route. Geographically, it runs along Russia's northern coast, linking Europe and Asia without the Mediterranean, Suez, the Red Sea, or the Indian Ocean. It also means a shorter route and lower costs. A large container ship burns dozens of tons of fuel every day. Even saving a week can mean millions of dollars on a single voyage, especially when fuel prices are high. That's why the Northern Sea route's increasingly viewed not as a full replacement for Suez, but as insurance. When the canal is congested, risky, or politically unstable, the Arctic route starts to look a lot less crazy. Russia's promoting this route as part of a long-term logistics strategy. The shipping volumes speak for themselves, from under 5 million tons in the early 2010s to roughly 36 million tons in 2023. The main cargoes are crude oil, refined petroleum products, LNG, and other raw materials. Transit traffic between Asia and Europe is still a small share, but it's growing. At the same time, Russia is trying to make the Northern Sea route increasingly appealing as an alternative to the Suez Canal. For example, the Russian government has approved a large-scale development plan through 2035 with funding of nearly $22 billion. The plan includes 150 separate measures like expanding the cargo base, building out transport infrastructure, developing the icebreaker and cargo fleets, improving navigation safety, and more steps that could significantly boost the route's attractiveness. But the main constraint, ice, isn't going anywhere. Even with the climate getting warmer, fully independent navigation without icebreaker escort is possible for only 3 to 4 months a year. The rest of the time, ships rely on nuclear icebreakers. That immediately raises the cost of a voyage. According to shipping companies, expenses for icebreaker services, reinforced hulls, and insurance can add 20 to 30% to transport costs. Cheap? No. Predictable? Not always. Still, the climate's quietly making the adjustments. Over the past 30 years, the area of summer Arctic sea ice has shrunk by about 40%. The navigation window is getting longer, and some sections remain passable for more time. For logistics, that means one thing: the route can be planned with greater confidence. In the global system, the Northern Sea route matters mainly as a bypass option. It avoids active conflict zones, doesn't hinge on decisions made in the Middle East, and isn't constrained by a narrow man-made canal. Yes, it's challenging, seasonal, and expensive. But in times of instability, routes like this are exactly the ones that start to matter. Not as a new normal, but as a fallback, cold, northern, and increasingly real. At this point, it's worth saying that reducing dependence doesn't always mean building a new route for trains or ships. There's an example of a country pursuing that goal by laying ordinary pipelines, pipes you can even travel through. Pipeline to the rescue. For years, Canada has wrestled with an oil paradox. A country holding some of the world's largest reserves concentrated in Alberta remained tied to a single customer for years. Almost all of its crude flowed south into the United States through pipelines, following a route that felt tried, predictable, and safe. That made things easier for companies, but it left the country exposed. Any trade dispute, a change of administration in Washington, or a drop in demand could hit revenues immediately. Canadian oil was sold at a discount because there were few alternatives, and the overcrowded U.S. market set the terms. While Canada kept looking south, the world was shifting east. Asia was growing fast and loud with an appetite that demanded energy on an industrial scale. China was building cities, factories, and ports, turning into the world's workshop. That required oil, lots of it, and supply sources were being hunted down across the globe. Canadian barrels could have fit into that picture, but geography and infrastructure kept them far from such a coveted market. Technically, there was a route to the ocean. The Trans Mountain Pipeline links Alberta to the British Columbia coast and the port of Burnaby, but its capacity was modest, only 300,000 barrels a day, and most of that still went to the United States. So yes, there was a path from Alberta to Asia, but it was largely symbolic, technically possible, practically useless for gaining any benefits. In circumstances like these, Canada came up with a bold idea to save the country. To reduce its reliance on the United States, it launched the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. It quickly became one of the biggest energy construction projects in modern Canadian history. The concept sounded simple: build a second pipeline alongside the existing one. In reality, that meant essentially doubling the corridor from Edmonton to the coast, under extremely demanding conditions. The route crossed mountains, rivers, and densely populated areas, so the team used horizontal directional drilling, reinforced pipe, and multi-level pressure monitoring. They installed automatic valves that can shut off the flow in seconds and deployed digital systems that detect even the slightest anomalies. Also, expanding an old pipeline isn't just a matter of laying one more line. The construction demanded meticulous work and protected natural areas and urban zones alike. Along the route, pressure and leak detection systems were installed and linked to 24/7 control centers, allowing operators to track every segment in real time. To reduce environmental impact, crews restored and rehabilitated soil where the pipeline crossed forests and wetlands. Upgrades also made it possible to use stronger steel and improved welds, which significantly lowers the risk of incidents and extends the pipeline's service life. The coastline became a challenge of its own. Near Vancouver, there was already a terminal. Well, terminal is generous. It was basically a single 1950s-era berth. In its place, a full modern complex rose with 3 new berths. Each one is designed to handle Aframax-class tankers, the workhorse ships used for long-distance international crude exports. Every berth has 2 primary loading arms plus an auxiliary one, so loading can be faster, more precise, and safer. The entire marine infrastructure was rebuilt almost from scratch. A new vessel approach and mooring system was added for steady, frequent traffic. Modern control and monitoring systems track loading in real time, reducing the chance of errors and accidents. It's no surprise that with management like that, the construction dragged on and the cost ballooned year after year. The price jumped from the original $5.4 billion to $34 billion Canadian dollars. Still, the project was eventually completed. Trans Mountain's capacity tripled from 300,000 to 900,000 barrels a day, and Canada almost immediately began to see its dependence on the U.S. for oil exports start to ease. If shipping oil tankers to Asia from Canada's coast used to be the exception, then after the pipeline came online in 2024, as many as 380 tankers set sail for international deliveries, and 57% of them went to Asia. Think of those 300,000 barrels per day the pipeline could carry before the expansion. By the third quarter of 2025, daily throughput had climbed to roughly 777,000 barrels per day. Yes, that's still short of the planned 900,000, but Canada is steadily reducing its reliance on its southern neighbor, and China's now the biggest buyer of Canadian oil. The expansion is clearly working.